I was standing in a hotel room that looked exactly the same, no matter which city you were in. Neutral walls, a generic desk bolted firmly to the floor, and a window that didn't open wide enough to matter. My bag was still half packed, my boots were by the door, and my laptop was open, displaying schematics I had been reviewing since dinner. My phone buzzed once on the desk. I didn't rush to grab it. Nothing urgent ever came in that late, unless a decision had already been made. When I finally picked it up, the message was short and neat, as if it had been edited several times before being sent. She wrote that we were separated for now. She added that I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. She said it was just space. There was no greeting, no let-in, and no suggestion of a conversation, just a statement delivered while I was hundreds of miles away, with no way to respond except through the same screen she used to send it. I sat down on the edge of the bed and read it again. Then a third time. Another message followed almost immediately, clarifying nothing. She said she needed room to think. She said the distance might be good for both of us. She said we would talk when things settled. I set the phone face down and finished reviewing the last page on my laptop. I closed the file, saved my notes, and shut the screen. Only then did I pick the phone back up. I replied once, not with a question, and not with an emotional reaction. I acknowledged what she had written and confirmed the separation. I stated that if we were done for now, then we were done. No conditions, no timeline. I hit send and placed the phone back on the desk. The room stayed quiet. There was no immediate response that told me more than a paragraph ever could. I opened my email and drafted two short messages. One was to the landlord, notifying them of an upcoming change in tenancy. The other was to the service we used for our shared accounts, requesting adjustments. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize the wording. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. The tone had shifted. She asked what I meant. She said she hadn't meant it like that. I didn't answer. From her side, it was a pause sent by text. From mine, it was the end. Acknowledged and closed before she realized those two things weren't the same. The first confirmation didn't come from her. It came from timing. The next morning, I checked out early and drove to the site I was assigned to inspect. It was the same routine, badge in, coffee from the same machine that never tasted right. I kept my phone in my pocket and didn't look at it until lunch. There were more messages by then. Not apologies, adjustments. She said she hadn't meant to sound so final. She said she thought we understood each other better than that. She said she needed space, not an ending. The words circled the same point without ever touching it. I didn't respond. While walking the site, I noticed how easily my focus stayed on the work in front of me. Measurements, reports, a cracked panel that hadn't been logged yet. Problems with clear parameters were always easier to deal with. During a break, I opened a shared app we used to coordinate expenses when I was traveling. A new device was logged in. It was local, in the same city as our apartment. The timestamp was recent enough to be careless. I didn't need to guess who it was. I logged out of the app and changed the access rights. The first attempt failed and kicked me back to the login screen. I tried again, and it went through. Not everything worked cleanly, but enough did. That afternoon, I sent a short follow-up email to the landlord, confirming the separation and asking about options to amend the lease. No accusations, no sob story attached, just a change in status. My phone buzzed again while I was reviewing notes. She said she didn't understand why I was acting so cold. She said I was overreacting. She said she was just trying to breathe. I finished the report and sent it before checking the message again. Later, I received a notification from a shared streaming account. A new profile had been added. It was a name I recognized immediately, her old boyfriend's first name, spelled the specific way she always did when she talked about him. I removed the account from my devices entirely. That evening, she called. Not once, but twice. I watched the screen light up and go dark again while I packed my bag for the next leg of the trip. She thought the distance gave her control. What she didn't realize was that sending a pause by text while I was far enough away not to argue had given me something else entirely. It had given me the ability to close things without interference. The proof didn't arrive as a confession. It surfaced through small coordination errors, the kind people make when they think no one is watching anymore. While waiting for a delayed inspection, I opened the phone again, not to read her messages, but to clear notifications. A shared ride app sent an alert about a completed trip. The pickup was near our apartment. The drop-off was a few blocks from an address I recognized without checking. The timing overlapped with when she said she was home, thinking things through. I closed the app and didn't open it again. Later, an email confirmation landed from a furniture rental service. A short-term order, 2 items, delivery window marked as flexible. The billing contact was her name. The delivery address wasn't ours. I forwarded the email to an archive folder and let it sit there. That evening, I stopped at a diner near the hotel, same booth as the last time I'd been in that town. I ate, paid, and went back without lingering. When I checked my phone again, there were missed calls stacked on top of each other. Her tone had changed between them. The first was firm. The second was impatient. The third was careful. A text followed. She said she felt like I was shutting her out. She said she hadn't done anything wrong. She said I was misreading the situation because of the distance. I didn't reply. Back in the room, I logged into the document storage we shared. I downloaded what mattered and changed the password. The update lagged for a moment and made me repeat the process. It went through on the second attempt. Another message came in almost immediately. She asked if I had changed something. She said she couldn't access a file she needed. She added a question mark, then another. I packed my bag slowly and set my alarm for the next morning. By the time I lay down, I knew enough. Not because I'd uncovered everything, but because the pattern had stopped pretending to be accidental. Short messages, temporary arrangements, access granted and revoked based on convenience. She hadn't wanted a conversation. She wanted room to move without accountability. What she hadn't accounted for was how final things become when someone treats a pause like a decision, and how quickly systems lock when no one is arguing to keep them open. By the time the plane landed for the next site visit, the separation had already started doing its work. I didn't go straight to the hotel. I stopped at a quiet cafe near the airport, ordered something I wouldn't finish, and opened my laptop. Not to think, but to act. I sent a follow-up message to the landlord confirming the change in occupancy and asking about the process to formalize it. The reply came back slower than I liked, asking for documentation. I forwarded what I had and waited. Not everything moved instantly, and that was fine. My phone buzzed again while I was still sitting there. She said she felt blindsided. She said this wasn't what she meant. She said I was turning a simple pause into something permanent. The phrasing told me she was already reframing it, trying to pull the ground back under her feet. I didn't respond. At the hotel, I unpacked only what I needed and left the rest in the bag. I logged into the utility account we both had access to and switched the primary contact to my email. The system lagged and forced me to refresh twice before it confirmed the change. I waited it out. That evening, I received a notification from a shared calendar we'd stopped really using. An entry had been added and then deleted in his neighborhood again. The same careless assumption that I wouldn't notice. I removed my account from the calendar entirely. Her next message came fast after that. She asked if something was wrong with the apps. She said she couldn't see upcoming expenses. She said it felt like I was cutting her off. I finished answering a work email before checking the message again. From my side, nothing dramatic was happening. No arguments, no raised voices, just confirmations, one after another, locking into place. The kind of work I was used to doing when something failed quietly and needed to be isolated before it affected the whole system. From her side, the pause was no longer empty space. It had edges now, boundaries that she hadn't planned for. She called once more that night. I let it ring and then go still. I set my alarm, turned off the light, and lay there listening to the unfamiliar hum of the room. Somewhere between one unanswered call and the next administrative reply, the separation she thought she controlled had finished becoming something else. It wasn't space anymore. It was distance that knew exactly where it was going. The first outside reaction came before she understood what she was losing. A message from the property manager arrived the next morning. Polite, neutral. They acknowledged the change and asked how we wanted to proceed with access and future communication. I replied with a simple confirmation and my details. Nothing accusatory, nothing emotional, just clarity. I forwarded the response to her without commentary. A few minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time, she didn't try to soften it. She said I was moving too fast. She said this wasn't fair. She said I was punishing her for asking for space. I didn't reply. At the site, I spent the morning walking through a problem that had been dragging on for weeks. Loose coordination, missed handoffs, everyone waiting for someone else to make the call. I made it. The tension eased immediately. It reminded me how quickly things stabilize when uncertainty is removed. During lunch, I checked one last shared account, a small one, subscriptions and recurring charges. Her ex's email was listed as a recovery contact. It wasn't new, just finally visible now that I was looking. I removed it and closed the account entirely. The system asked me to confirm twice. I did. That afternoon, she tried a different angle, a longer message. She said she was hurt by how cold I'd become. She said she expected a conversation, not silence. She said she never thought I'd just walk away. I read it once while waiting for a status update and didn't respond. Later, a notification came through from a neighbor back home. They asked if everything was okay because someone else had been parking in our spot regularly. The name they mentioned matched what I already knew. I thanked them and said it was handled. That evening, she called again. This time, the call didn't end quickly. It rang until it cut off on its own. When it stopped, the room felt quieter than before. She had treated distance like a cushion, something she could sink into and shape around herself. What she hadn't expected was that distance could harden into form, that a pause, once acknowledged without resistance, stops being negotiable. By the end of that day, the separation wasn't theoretical anymore. Other people were responding to it. Systems were updating. Doors were closing without being slammed. And for the first time, she wasn't asking for space. She was reacting to the fact that it had limits. The social shift started quietly, the way it always does when a story stops being private. I didn't announce anything when I returned home between trips. I picked up a rental car, drove to a temporary place I'd arranged, and went straight to sleep. By morning, messages were already waiting, not from her, but from people who assumed I knew more than I was saying. A colleague asked if I was still commuting from the same place. A neighbor sent a polite check-in, mentioning unfamiliar cars coming and going. Someone from her office reached out about an upcoming event she was supposed to host, asking if I knew whether she was still available. I replied that they should contact her directly. She noticed the change that afternoon. Her tone shifted again, moving from frustration to urgency. She said people were asking questions. She said things felt off. She said she didn't like that others were getting involved. I didn't answer. At work, I closed out the last shared authorization tied to our address. It took longer than expected because the system flagged the change for review. I uploaded the separation notice and waited. It cleared later that day without comment. That evening, she posted online for the first time since the text. Nothing direct. A photo of a coffee cup, a caption about clarity. The responses were polite but thin. No one filled in the meaning for her. The next morning, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. They asked carefully if everything was okay between us. Not what happened, not whose fault it was, just if things were stable. I said I was fine. From what filtered back, she had started explaining herself before anyone asked, emphasizing that it was temporary, that it was mutual, that it was healthy. The more she tried to manage the narrative, the less control she seemed to have over it. I stayed quiet. Same routines, same work rhythm, no public framing. From her side, the pause was no longer invisible. People were adjusting around it without waiting for her version. Invitations slowed. Responses came later. The absence of a clear anchor made her movements more noticeable, not less. She had expected space to give her freedom. Instead, it had made her visible in ways she hadn't prepared for. And the more she tried to stabilize the image, the clearer it became to everyone else that something had already ended, even if she hadn't decided what to call it yet. She tried to regain balance by leaning on what she thought was still reliable. Her messages shifted from explanation to checking. She asked where I was staying. She asked if we could talk when I got back. She asked if this was really necessary. Each question arrived framed as concern, but the spacing between them tightened, like she was testing whether I was still within reach. I didn't answer. From what reached me through others, the situation she'd stepped into wasn't offering the relief she'd expected. The former boyfriend, who was always available, stayed available, but only in the ways that cost her time and energy. He was present without being steady, close without being useful. The same dynamic she had once described as exhausting returned without the benefit of nostalgia. She stopped mentioning him entirely, not because he was gone, but because he no longer supported the version of the story she wanted to tell. One afternoon, she showed up at the apartment without warning. Not to move things, just to check the building access still worked. The unit door didn't. She stood there longer than necessary, phone in hand, reading messages I wasn't sending. Later that evening, someone she trusted contacted me instead. They asked if she was okay. Not what was happening, not why it ended, just if she was okay. I said she was safe. I didn't add anything else. After that, her messages slowed. Fewer words, longer pauses. When they came, they arrived late without framing or intent, just attempts to confirm presence. I kept my routines unchanged: work, travel, quiet evenings, no public explanation, no emotional signals. From her side, the pause had stopped feeling temporary. The ground she thought she could step back onto was no longer adjusting to her weight. Friends were polite but distant. Work deadlines tightened. The comfort she expected from familiarity wasn't materializing. She had chosen space thinking it would give her control. Instead, it removed the structure that had been quietly absorbing her uncertainty. All along, I didn't block her. I didn't disappear. I stayed visible without being accessible, the way systems do when permissions change. And for the first time since that initial text, she wasn't asking for space anymore. She was reacting to what happens when space doesn't wait for you to decide what it means. The confrontation didn't happen face to face. It happened the only way it still could. She caught me between flights during a stretch when my phone was finally on and her messages went through all at once. Not angry, not pleading, careful. She said we needed to talk because things were getting misunderstood. She said this wasn't what she wanted. She said she felt like I decided everything without her. I read it while sitting at the gate, people moving around me without paying attention. I waited until boarding was called before responding. I told her I hadn't decided anything for her. I said I had responded to what she sent. I reminded her that she had framed it as a separation. I said I had acknowledged it and acted accordingly. She replied immediately. She said that wasn't fair. She said she'd meant emotional space, not logistics. She said she thought I understood the difference. I told her I understood exactly what had been written. I said I don't negotiate against assumptions. I said I don't stay in open-ended arrangements that only work when one person is absent. There was a pause after that, longer than before. When her next message came, the tone had shifted. She said she felt like she was losing me. She said she hadn't expected me to accept it so easily. She said she thought I'd push back. I didn't comment on that. I told her I was open to clear terms, not ambiguity. I told her I wasn't available for pauses that only benefited one side. I told her if we were separated, then we were separated, and I had already aligned my life to that reality. She asked if there was any way to undo it. I didn't answer right away. The plane started boarding, and I put the phone away until I was seated and the cabin quieted again. When I responded, I said, undoing things requires agreement before action, not after. I said what she called space had already been used. I said I wasn't interested in redefining it now that it no longer felt safe for her. She didn't reply after that. When I landed, there were no new messages waiting, just the last one sitting there, unanswered like a door she'd expected to stay unlocked. For the first time since she sent that original text, she wasn't managing the distance. She was facing the shape it had already taken. The collapse didn't arrive loudly. It reached me in pieces, carried by other people who didn't realize they were delivering it. The first sign was a message from someone I barely knew, asking if I had a new address. They said my wife seemed overwhelmed and had mentioned that things were unsettled. I replied with a short answer and nothing else. After that, the former boyfriend disappeared from the edges of the story entirely. Not referenced, not defended. From experience, I knew that meant the arrangement had stopped working. When something is stable, people talk about it. When it fails, they erase it and hope no one asks why. What filtered back was uneven. She had been staying in different places, never long enough to feel anchored. Work deadlines slipped. Meetings were rescheduled. The confidence she relied on didn't disappear, but it stopped being supported by results. People noticed without commenting. She showed up at a professional event she used to control. Same look, same posture, but the room didn't adjust around her this time. Conversations didn't pause. No one turned to include her. She stayed, then left early. No one followed. Someone who still spoke to both of us said she'd started bringing up the past without meaning to. Not arguments, but moments. Things she hadn't valued at the time, resurfacing when there was nothing else to reach for. Me answering calls no matter where I was. Me handling problems before they became crises. Me not needing reassurance because I was already steady. Those memories didn't comfort her. They arrived too late when the structure that held them was gone. She came by the apartment one evening without warning, not angry, not prepared. She stood outside longer than she knocked, like she was waiting for permission from the building itself. When I opened the door, she looked disoriented. Not broken, but unplaced. Like someone who had misjudged distance and now didn't know how far they had traveled. She said my name and stopped. Her voice faltered on the second breath. I didn't step aside. I didn't close the door. I waited. Everything she tried to keep temporary arrived all at once, and there was nowhere left for it to go. She didn't start with an apology. She started with permission. She asked if she could come in. Not confidently, not automatically, like someone who had finally noticed that doors don't open just because they used to. I stepped back enough to let her cross the threshold, then closed the door behind her. Not to trap her, but to contain the moment. The apartment was quiet, arranged the way it had been since I moved in. Nothing provisional, nothing waiting. She stood where she was, bag still on her shoulder. She didn't set. She didn't set it down. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said the space was supposed to be temporary. She said she didn't think one message would change everything. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct the timeline. She said being alone hadn't felt the way she imagined. She said the clarity she expected never came. She said the people she thought would support her had stayed polite and distant. She said she felt like she'd stepped out of something solid and discovered there was nothing under it. I told her I believed that. She looked up at that, surprised. Then she asked the question she'd been circling since the first reply I sent from that hotel room. She asked if there was any way back. I told her I don't reverse decisions made in writing and confirmed in action. I told her when someone asks for space, I don't chase them through it. I take them at their word and close what needs to be closed so it doesn't keep shifting. She said she hadn't expected me to let go so easily. I told her I hadn't let go easily. I had let go cleanly. There was a long pause after that. No dramatics, no bargaining, just the sound of her breathing, adjusting to the reality in front of her. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I wasn't trying to win anything. I told her I was finished living inside open-ended terms that only existed when I wasn't in the room. She nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. When she left, she didn't ask when we'd talk again. She picked up her bag, thanked me for listening, and walked out. I locked the door and stood there for a moment, then went back to what I was doing before she arrived. The separation she sent as a message had ended as a fact. Not because I escalated it, but because I accepted it exactly as it was written.